All right, welcome everybody. This is the 5:30 joint work session of the Ogden City and Planning Commission. And just good to see everyone here. Like, I think we have at least one person online. So if you're talking, please use the mic so that they can hear you. Otherwise, they may not be able to hear you very well. So what we've done in the past on these meetings is just kind of go around the room and have everybody introduce themselves. And I think if we can just introduce your name and maybe how long you've served or been serving in your position. And let's go with your NFL team if you got one. And if you don't, that's okay too. Just maybe something to add to that. So we'll start over here with Glenn, or let's start with Barton.
Okay, so Barton Brierly, I'm the planning director. I've been planning director for 2 years, 2.5 years, I think. And I've got.
Yeah.
And I've got two NFL teams. I actually lived in Minnesota for a couple years growing up, so I'm a Vikings fan.
Okay.
When I was a young kid, I was a fan of Ed Podolak and Jan Stenerud and Hank Stram and Len Dawson. So I've been a Chiefs fan for a long, long time. And I'm happy to see them actually do good now.
James, yeah, let's go James and then down.
Okay.
I'm James Tanner. I've been with the city attorney's office now going on 4 years. It'll be 4 years in December. NFL teams, I like disappointment, so I'm a Raiders fan, a Giants fan.
Okay, Glenn Symes, I work in the council office. I've been with the council office for almost 14 years, so a few minutes. And I'm also, I like some of the punishment too. So I've been a Detroit Lions fan since the mid '80s, which has been a little rough sometimes.
Bart Blair, Glenn and I came together. I've been here almost 14 years. So city council, even after Monday night, I'm still an Eagles fan. I'm used to heartache, so I'll always be an Eagles fan.
My name is Dave Graff. I graduated from the Planning Commission to City Council in January. And I was at Lambeau Field on Sunday and witnessed a backup quarterback support the Green Bay Packers all the way to victory. Sorry about the Viking people. And although I was a Fran Parkington, Carl Eller, Jim Marshall fan as a kid, my parents were both Minnesotans. And you got nothing to cry about with the Lions, Glenn. They're playing football, man. Yeah.
Andre Amadov, newest planning commissioner, been here almost about 5-6 months. And I'm also an Eagles fan. Go Birds.
I'm Mandy Shale and I'm a planning commissioner. I've been on the commission now for 3 years. And I'm sorry, I don't like football. I'm a basketball girl and not even a Jazz fan. I'm a Houston Rockets girl. Sorry.
All right.
Rick Southwick, this is my third mayor, so I know it's been at least, and I haven't been on quite as long as Kathy, but I'm guessing 16 plus years.
Yeah.
And grew up in Columbus, no professional team, so I'm a Bengals fan, another long-suffering group, but first and foremost, I'm a Buckeye, so.
Rick Safeston on the Planning Commission. I've been here this go round, I think 5 years, I think is where I'm at, maybe 6. But anyway, I'm a Seahawks fan. Jim Zorn, all that.
Jordan Neighborg, and I've been on the Planning Commission for 3 years with Mandy and Jeremy. I don't have a team, so I don't really watch it.
Michelle Williams, I'm on the Planning Commission. I think I'm almost a year. I don't know. Barton, is that about right? Okay, almost a year. I don't have a team either, but my son always liked the Eagles, so I'll go with the Eagles. Donovan McNabb, number 5. Okay, there we go.
Oh, sorry. Well,
Jenny Sandow, I've been here about 7.5 years and I couldn't even tell you the teams. I don't watch football unless it's on, and then it's whoever's voting for the piece in the house, I go for that one.
Kathy Blaisdell, 22 years. Yeah, wow is right. And I don't have a favorite team unless BYU counts, or Weber State, or Utah. But my kids like the Bears. So if I had to pick one, it'd be the Bears.
Jeremy Shinoda, Planning Commission, third year, Cowboys.
Oh, there we are. There it is. Hey, so we're gonna have Brandon take the mic to the back row here. So we'll continue that.
Cowboys, oh, Cowboys.
Hello.
There we go. I think I knew about that team. I seriously don't know about that.
Hello. Hello, David Sawyer, Ogden City Community and Economic Development. And I usually just go for whoever the underdog is. I pull for the underdog. So in the past, that's been very easy for me. I'm a Nebraska Cornhusker college football fan, but this year they're actually doing pretty good. So they're ranked number 22. I think they're number 22 in the country. So not bad.
They're still underdogs.
They're still an underdog. Yep, still pulling.
Brandon Rippian, senior planner. I've been here 2 years now. My team used to be the Washington Redskins because Mark Rippian played for them. So, but yeah, somehow. So anyway, that's me. Here, Joe.
Joe Simpson with the planning department, and I've been here for over 17 years now. And as far as football, I'm kind of with Jenny. I could name maybe a few of the teams, but not very many. I'm more into like UFC fighting kind of sports. So that's my gig.
Court McGee.
Damian Rodriguez, I have been with the planning department for a little over a year now. NFL wise, I don't have a team, unfortunately, so.
Alyssa Gerardo. I've been a planner for 2 years in October. I don't watch the NFL. I do college football. So we cheer on the Utes in our house. So yeah.
I'm Haley Hale. I'm a planner. I've been here for almost 3 years in November. And then I'd say my favorite team is the Bengals.
Her brother-in-law plays for the Bengals, that's why.
Oh, that would be why.
I'm Kathy Barron, and I work in the planning department as administrative assistant 1. And I don't watch a lot of football either.
I'm Amy Pagano. I've been with Ogden City for 9 years, but the planning department for like 3 weeks. So oh, probably the Bears. That's my family likes.
Yeah, let's get this row too.
I'm Janine Eller-Smith. I'm the council executive director. I've been in the council office. If Glenn's been 14 years, I've probably been 16. But I worked for Ogden City for close to 29 years. And all I can say is, what is this NFL you speak of?
I'm Brandon Garside. I'm the communications director for the council, and I've been here, is it 7 years now? Yeah. Is it 6? It will be 7. 6 years. And I just follow Wildcats in the NFL. So the Saints with Rashid Shaheed and Taron Johnson with the Bills. So
Good answer.
Jonah Hill with the Chargers. Yeah.
Browns. What's his name?
I'm Eric Davenport. And I'm a communication specialist for the council. I've also been here 6 years, and I like the Eagles as well.
I'm Marcia White. I'm on the council. I've been
Oh, I'm counting. I think I'm in my 11th year. I like a team called the Husker in the Hood, which is my fantasy football team. And I am a Nebraska fan as well. So
All right, good deal. I'm Ken Ritchie. This is my 3rd year on the council, and I do suffer. I am actually really surprised there are no other Denver Bronco fans in this room, living in Utah. But I grew up with John Elway and Steve Atwater and Carl Mecklenburg and all those guys. So, but yeah, I also. What is this NFL we speak of with the I don't think the Broncos show up any at all these days. So. And we do have one online. Steve, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Awesome. Hey, I wish I was there. You guys look like a cute little family. Somebody pass the gravy. I don't follow. I'm Steve Burton. I'm really new in the council office. I've been there since the beginning of the year. And I don't follow football super closely. I used to be a Colts fan when I was younger. So that's what I'll leave it. I'll leave it there.
All right. Thank you, Steve. Okay. Well, we are here for some annual training. And so this is exciting stuff, everyone. So we're going to turn it over to Barton to start off. And then James and then Steve Burton, who's online, will be our 3rd presenter. I'll go there.
Well, it's a privilege to talk to all of you. We do this training each year. One, it's required, but also it's just a good idea for you to learn about. There's always more to learn in planning and how to deal with land use. As we talked about with council staff about what we might talk about, is something that actually doesn't get talked about very much, which is development agreements. We talk a lot about zoning and permits and site plans and zone changes and all those things. And development agreements often kind of come up and a lot of people don't know what they are or what you can do with them. So we thought this would be a good opportunity to go over some of the basics. So I'm going to talk some basics about development agreements. James is going to talk specifically about land transfer and development agreements. And then Steve's going to talk a bit about some of the trends with the legislature and what's going on there. So just to start with the basics, what is a development agreement? By state law, a development agreement is a written agreement between a municipality and one or more parties that regulates or controls the use or development of a specific area of land. So it's tied to how someone can use that piece of property and under what conditions. Some of the basics, a development agreement is voluntary. So a property owner never has to sign a development agreement. If they don't want to enter into it, they don't have to. Likewise, the city isn't obligated to do a development agreement. If you don't like it, you don't have to. So it's completely voluntary on both sides. And I put voluntary in quotes because there are really persuasive reasons sometimes to do a development agreement. Like if a developer comes in and says, hey, I want to change the zone of the property so I can do this project. And the city says, well, we want you to do a development agreement because we want A, B, and C. And they say, well, I don't want to do that development agreement. And then the city can say, well, I don't want to do the zone change. And then, well, I don't want to do the development agreement, but I want the zone change. And so you sometimes go around the block 2 or 3 times and end up saying, well, yeah, this development agreement really isn't all that voluntary. Yes, you have to do it. So yeah, right. But they are related to some discretionary approval. So you can't do a development agreement if you can't require a development agreement for somebody to do something that's already permitted. A development agreement should convey benefits and obligations to both parties. So we often say, okay, sign a development agreement because we want you to develop this kind of project. We want this kind of siting, landscaping. We want you to dedicate this land. We want all this stuff from you in order to do your development. don't be surprised if it's the flip side, where the property owner, the developer says, well, if I sign it, I should get something out of it. Yeah, I might get that zone change or that project approval, but maybe I want something else from you. Maybe I want you to waive my fees. Maybe I want you to commit to providing a sewer lift station at a certain time, or maybe I want you to promise clear out in the future that I'm going to be able to do this project. So there is negotiation that happens when you do development agreements, and they can vary from project to project. So how are they used? The way that they are most often used in Ogden are with zone changes, where someone has a zoning and they want a change specifically to like a mixed use zone or conditional overlay, where we say, okay, yeah, we'll approve that, but we want some limits, or we want some conditions, or we want some guardrails on that project. So we can do, anytime we do a conditional overlay, it has specific standards and it's tied to a development agreement. It can happen with annexations. Ogden doesn't do a lot of annexations, but there's a lot of other communities that do. And a lot of cities will say, okay, as we're going to give you the privilege of being a member of our city and using our sewer and our water and getting our zoning. But with that privilege, we want you to do X, Y, and Z. Maybe we want you to dedicate a park. Maybe we want you to build a sewer line, or we want you to commit to certain kind of housing. There's lots of things that can happen. Where we have special standard developments, like plan developments or do density transfers. We don't do a lot of these in Ogden, but communities do those where for some benefit, you like maybe you get a little bit of extra density, but you have to commit to do something, and that's memorialized in a development agreement. You're transferring land. James will talk more about that. That's often when like redevelopment owns a piece of property and they're conveying it to a developer. But it could be other things, like maybe they want the city to vacate a piece of right of way. We might have a development agreement that relates to that transaction. And installation of public improvements. Maybe an area needs a water booster pump station or a reservoir or something because it's too high on the hill to serve that. And we don't want them to just put in a tiny lift station or a tiny reservoir. We want it big enough to serve the entire area. And so we might enter an agreement that says, hey, you'll agree to put in this bigger facility. But we might have an agreement that says something about how they get reimbursed for that, or maybe we charge future developments for the cost of that improvement. Might relate to like a park that you have to dedicate a park, and there might be some benefits for that. Some things that a development agreement cannot do. It cannot allow something that isn't allowed by zoning. You can't break the law through a development agreement. So it can be more restrictive than your code, but it can't be less restrictive. And there's a little caveat to this, is the state legislature just recently amended that and says, well, if your development agreement is adopted by the legislative body through a legislative process, it's kind of like adopting a new zoning ordinance for that property, so you actually can do that. So our code hasn't caught up to that yet. Our code still says it can't be less restrictive, but it's now a possibility that wasn't before. It can't bind legislators to change a zone or development agreement. It can't prevent legislators from changing the law in the future. So as a legislator, city councilor, you have the ability to make decisions on things, and a development agreement can't take that away. And so often there's a sequence that goes along with that, where you've got a development agreement and the zone change that will be heard on the same night, same time, and adopted together. But you can't have a development agreement that says, okay, next year I'll change the zone, something. some of the benefits of that, it's often to push a higher quality of development. You know, we want something better out of what's going on. We want better trails, better architecture, more open space, a transit stop or anything on there. A development agreement allows you to get things that you couldn't otherwise require just by straight zoning. Or I say at least avoids the argument. You know, sometimes like infrastructure where maybe you have to install a traffic signal and the developer says, well, that's going to cost a lot of money. You can't really make me, based on my development, put in that traffic signal. And we can argue that, and it's a judgment call sometimes whether you can require that or not. But you can avoid that argument by saying, hey, we'll do a development agreement and you know, you'll put in the traffic signal and our part will do something, give you more height or density or something like that. So dedications right away or some things again that can, there's always a question how far the city can go to require dedications. And with the development agreement, you can require it and then you don't have to argue about it later because everybody agreed. And the last one, it's sort of a comfort mechanism because your jobs, planning commission and city councilors, are tough. You know that because you've always got people coming to you and half the people are wanting to go left and half you're going right and you're stuck in the middle. And it's like, okay, so what do I do in this? You know, I have a developer coming in saying, hey, I really want to do this project. And the neighbor's saying, hey, we don't want that project in our neighborhood. So what do you do? So sometimes, for better or worse, planning commissions and councils just kind of use as a comfort mechanism where we split the baby a little bit. Yeah, we'll let you do this development, but we'll require something above and beyond for this. So, so sometimes it's used for that. Are there drawbacks? Yes, definitely. One drawback is it ends up creating this sort of mini zoning ordinance that applies only to this specific property. This is one that I looked up. This is on our map, this C3CO. CO says it's conditional overlay, so there's a development agreement on the project. So I thought this is where like Freddy's Hamburgers is, that area. So there's conditional overlay on that. And I thought, oh, let me look up and see what's the provisions of that conditional overlay. And I found that there's a development agreement and it's been like amended 3 times and I couldn't really find the final development agreement. And there's some rules about signs that you have to put in there. And I couldn't quite figure out what those sign rules are. So, you know, it might take several hours to just kind of dig in and figure out, well, what are the special zoning rules for this property? So that apply to this property and not to the neighbors. It's
Maybe it's they only can serve skinny fries.
right. Yes. Yes. So they're hard to track when you do that because everyone has its own agreement and you got to dig up what it means. And are they really just a substitute for poorly written zoning ordinances? We looked at one area where we had a development agreement and it was they'd applied to change it to a multifamily zone because they wanted to do an apartment building there. And we didn't, at that time, we didn't have really good design standards for apartments. And so we did a conditional overlay with a development agreement that says, okay, your apartment building's got to look like this. And we got there that way. But later on, we just changed the zoning ordinance to say, okay, if you do an apartment, here's exactly what it looks like. Here's all the standards. And so, which is, in my opinion, a better way than trying to make this a specific rule for a specific property. Just change rules and have a good zoning ordinance that applies. They're hard to change. You know, goes through the process and then you know, later on somebody wants to change something because maybe the market changed or design standards change or they sold it to someone else. And I can say that projects never look exactly like that piece of paper that's in your packet. No matter how hard you try, it never looks exactly like that. And so we're always looking at, well, there was this picture in the packet that says it's going to look like it, and they want to change that color of brick to a little bit different color of brick. Is that okay? It was in the development agreement that it had to be there. And so, is that something that's got to come all the way back through the process, back up to city council to change the color of brick or something like that? It's tough. And then on this example where we have this conditional overlay, well, that was signed by a developer a decade ago who's now gone, who's now sold it to 5 different parties. And so how do we change that? Do we need all 5 of those property owners to sign it? Do we need, just to change the sign standards because somebody wants to put up a different sign or stuff like that? So they can be difficult to change, and they really age poorly because you got to do all that digging up what the standards were at the time. And I know looked at one, and it was done in the 90s, and it was 90s architecture. And we're looking at, well, by law, you got to stick with your 90s architecture. You can't do. So yeah, they age poorly. The parties change. So just kind of some recommendations on this, and you'll notice my bias when I talk, but I'm not a fan of development agreements. But we've talked with some other cities that really love them. There's other communities that say, yeah, we do them all the time. We love them. They're great. Yeah, you should do them. So take it for what's worth. This is my little bit of my bias showing through, but my recommendation is to use them sparingly. If you can get the same thing done another way without doing a development agreement, then do it that way. And think about the future. This was a great phone. That's like the 90s architecture building, But think about, after the lots are sold and there's new property owners and they want to put in a carport, and it's like, oh, plans never really showed a carport. So no, you can't do a carport. And, think about how that can happen in the future. Keep it simple. I think figure out what it is that you really want to do. Is it that you really don't want a gas station car wash on this corner? You're okay with it being commercial, but you don't really want that use. Then just make that simple. Say, we're changing the zone, but you can't do a car wash or gas station there. And then we don't have to look at a concept drawing that was done by 3 developers ago to figure out what color brick ought to be. So and give room for change. Like I said, it's never ever going to look exactly like that picture before you. They're going to build it now, but 10 years from now, they're going to expand or do something different or change the use. So think about that ahead of time. So, and give some room for change and just how you can amend it without everybody being offended. Oh, you didn't do exactly what you said. Know what the sort of box is there. So. And finally, how to adopt it. By state law, it may be administrative or it may be legislative. So most of what the code we have now, most of them have to come to the city council to be adopted, but then executed by the mayor. Some, like a land transfer and development agreement, might go to the redevelopment agency for execution. So, which is kind of a segue into James and the land transfer and development agreements.
Real quick, James, before you jump in, we did introductions, but we had a council member join us. So if you would just let us know who you are, how long you've been serving, and your favorite Denver Bronco football team.
Favorite what? I don't have one of those, so that's easy.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, pass on that. Okay, I'm Angela Chaburka. I think I know most of you. Thanks so much. I apologize. I was late. I had a different meeting that collided. I've been on the council for almost 7 years, and I represent District 1.
Thank you.
All right.
Raider fan.
Yeah, I'm going to talk about just a small subset of development agreements. Actually, for Ogden City, it's more of the larger subset, being the land transfer and development agreement. These typically are when they're used when the redevelopment agency is transferring property to a developer in during a redevelopment project. A lot of the land transfer and development agreements, in addition to the transfer, we also it also comes along with an incentive agreement, participation and incentive agreement. So there's usually many times there's an incentive feature along with that as well. One thing I have noticed about our land transfer and development agreements is they are very long on transfer and very short on development. So we actually have some land transfer and development agreements and then a separate development agreement, which I've never really thought made sense. So I'm actually going to try to marry the two a little bit and try to put everything in the same agreement, because then we'll have more of a bargain for exchange there. They're getting the property, we're getting the development that we want. I mean, typically, the city can do land transfer and development agreements as well. It's rare. Typically, we want all of our redevelopment going through the redevelopment agency because it's much more beneficial. Barton mentioned that he doesn't really like development agreements all that much. I kind of share the same sentiment. Honestly, so does the state legislature. They tinker with the statute quite often. Steve's going to be giving you a little more detail of the most recent rounds of state legislature as it comes to development agreements. But the state legislature looks at it as, just really beef up and write a better ordinance, zoning ordinance. They think that most land transfer, they think that most development agreements are a way for a city to contract around their zoning ordinance. And so they're not received well on the Hill. Beyond that, I will pass the baton to Steve because land transfer and development agreements, there's a transfer of property, they're in exchange for development. So.
Okay, sounds good. I've got to do I've got to be on two different devices here. My internet connection is not great, so I'll be presenting from my laptop but talking to my phone through my phone. And I just want to say good evening, everyone. Sorry I can't be there. I came down with something earlier this morning, and I don't want to share it with you. So, but for those of you who don't know me, I'm Steve Burton. I mentioned earlier I'm newer in the council office. I've got a background in planning. I was a planner, a county planner, specifically in Idaho and Utah for the last 8 or 9 years before coming to work in the council office. And I was gonna say, it's interesting that Barton and James don't like development agreements because I love them. No, I'm just kidding. I don't like them just as much, I think, as they don't. So, and I'll talk a little bit about recent trends about that and kind of what the local government planning profession teaches and talks about it when it comes to development agreements. So let me share my screen here. That displaying okay?
Looks
awesome.
Good.
Okay. So I'm going to go over what Utah Code says about development agreements and how it's changed over the last few years. I'm also going to talk about recent trends with development agreements. I've included on this slide these images to help share just a few, I guess, anecdotes about development agreements that I've experienced without saying, where exactly any of these were. But this image on the left is, you can see it's a Maverick site under construction. I took the picture because it looked cool and I wanted to show my sons of the cool construction equipment they'd appreciate. But looking back through my phone, trying to find pictures of development, I found this and it reminded me of this is a Maverick site in a jurisdiction I worked for. Maverick wanted to put up a new building and redo their site. The place that the jurisdiction I worked for, they didn't have great commercial standards, and we really wanted Maverick to enter into a development agreement, and I just want to say I've got nothing but good things to say about Maverick. They were great to work with, and they pushed back understandably, and we're like, no, we can do this according to our zone, and it took it pushed their time frame back a little bit and probably cost them some time and money. But the city really wanted, or sorry, not the city, the jurisdiction I work for really wanted to make sure that the site would have been walkable and aesthetically pleasing, which as planners, you know that it's kind of hard to do with a gas station to do that. And the problem was that the local land use code didn't require the site to be walkable or to have those nice architectural features. And ultimately what was built, there was no development agreement, and what was built was what was in the code. I don't think the public was too happy about the site, but the entity that I worked for did eventually change the commercial zoning requirements so that future sites had to build what was beneficial to the community. And it was about the same time that the rules about development agreements made it into state code. And I don't think this specific case is why, but I think there were many like this throughout the state that I believe caused the legislature to state what development agreements can and can't do, which Barton went over. The image on the right, I wanted to include that because it looks like a few examples of development agreements that I've been in charge of administering as a planner. When you look at areas like unincorporated counties, it can start to make sense why development agreements can be used so frequently, because in counties, in unincorporated counties, they often have good access to recreation and resort and forest amenities like ski resorts. Can you guys still hear me? I'm just checking in.
Yeah, we can still hear you.
Awesome. Okay, thanks. I appreciate it. Sorry, going back to county, forested resort recreation areas can be beneficial to landowners and be lucrative to landowners, but counties often have limited zoning ordinances or limited utilities, and because of this, landowners are and elected officials, I think, tend to get creative through development agreements and trying to allow these types of developments that will increase, tax base and lower tax burden on the community. But I think one problem with relying so heavily on them, as I think Barton pointed out, is you get files that look like this one on the right, and then every time there's an amended and reinstated, you have to go back and keep track of that previous file and then add that on top of several different sites. It can be a full-time job just to administer development agreements in an area. Okay, I'm now going to go over how the Utah code has changed around development agreements. So up until 2021, the Utah code didn't say much about development agreements. It referred to them, but it wasn't until 2021 that it included rules about the process for approving them. And this was because of some case law where cities or counties were requiring them, and landowners didn't want them. And it also came about because of some referenda where the public was opposed to these agreements that were being made with the landowners, between landowners and the city or county. And so as a result, you have HB 409 that was introduced, that was put into place to say that there needs to be a public, legislative process, just like when a zoning rule or ordinance is adopted. And it makes it so the public can know and be part of this process that sometimes referred to as a contract zoning or zoning by contract. And then 2023, HB 406 was put into state code to say that if a development agreement restricts an owner's rights, that it must be explicitly noted in the agreement. I think like I'm trying to think of an example of this, and the one I thought of would be maybe you've got a developer that's been given some extra lots to develop, but because there are so many extra lots, maybe the city needs extra time to review permit applications. You know, maybe it's on a hillside or something, and the city needs extra time to review the application. So because state code states that permits have to be reviewed in so many days, that provision would have to be a right that the landowner is lose because of that agreement, and that he specifically noted in the agreement. And then you've got HB 406 also clarified from 2023, also clarified that a city can't require a development agreement as a condition of developing land. This is where it gets confusing. If the city code already states the applicable standards for development. Now, if you're like me, you go back and reread that, it doesn't make much sense, which is why earlier this year they clarified and said what Bart mentioned earlier, which is that you can't require a development agreement if the project that's proposed is already allowed under the city code. Excuse me. I included some images here of development. The one on the left is some storage units that were permitted under a commercial zone. Everybody loves storage units, right? Similar to the other situation that I described earlier, the jurisdiction there wanted to say how the storage units needed to look, but the zoning code allowed these these beautiful concrete masonry units, and so that's what was built. And then I'll talk just a little bit about recent trends with development agreements. One trend that we're seeing is some cities and counties are want to use development agreements to address and allow for affordable and workforce housing through development agreements. Park City and Summit County see quite a few development agreements for things like this. I know Park City just did one called Engine House, where about 100 of the 123 apartment units were deed restricted for affordable housing. In cases like this, the development agreement can be useful in describing, you know, who's going to track all the deeds and monitor compliance and make sure that resident income doesn't exceed that the income level. Development agreement in this case will typically describe the terms and incentives for the developer providing the affordable housing, usually getting some kind of density increase. And I think another trend that we're seeing with kind of this zoning reform that's going on in the state and in the country, it's being talked a lot about at conferences and land use trainings, is municipalities are seeing some of these side effects of development agreements and have started asking questions like, should we really be doing development agreements? And I've got a picture of my favorite philosopher here, Socrates, or as I like to call him, Socrates. Maybe he was referring to development agreements when he asked why. And then let's see, as I mentioned earlier, state code. Let's see. State code says, and the state has recently reiterated that cities have to allow what's in their code if somebody's proposing it and going through the proper process. And this has led a lot of cities to do kind of an assessment of their zoning codes to make sure that the code will require architectural, landscaping, walkable standards, all that good stuff, things that are supported generally by the public. And we know that obviously Ogden's go through Zone Ogden, the code update, and there are some other cities doing similar things like Salt Lake and Provo and Mill Creek, and I'm sure Barton and the planners know several other cities doing updates like this. But with these code rewrites, cities and landowners are realizing that zoning codes don't have to be these long, convoluted documents. I think if they're written properly, they can provide the predictability of old zoning codes, but also the flexibility that landowners often want. That can happen through development agreements. I think a lot of cities are also realizing that administering development agreements can take away from government efficiency because of the time it takes to negotiate and monitor compliance. I guess just finishing up here, I'll say that while landowners and cities have become more cautious about using development agreements are still a policy tool in the government toolkit. It's still something that state code allows in certain cases. I appreciate what Barton said, that development agreements shouldn't be substitutes for poorly written code. I would echo that. And yeah, that's what I've got for you. Happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Steve. Thanks for all the presentations. Is there any discussion or questions or?
One thing I'd like to add is that Steve mentioned that House bill in 2023 required the city essentially to, if we're restricting a property owner's or developer's rights by requiring a development agreement, that we had to list in writing all of the rights that they are giving up. Since it's the city attorney's office that typically writes these things, I think we had every single city attorney's office in the state of Utah complaining about that, because the city attorney represents the city. We don't represent the developers. Developers have their own attorneys. And so it should not be that shouldn't be the burden of the city attorney's office to tell developers what rights they are giving up. So luckily in 2024, they have reversed course on that, and they have removed that provision out of the code.
Question, I'm assuming you don't record the development agreements? Is that?
They do get recorded.
Do they get recorded?
Yes, they get recorded. They're on the title. So yeah, when you buy a property, you should see that on your title report that there is a development agreement.
So has that not always been the case though? When you talk about how cumbersome it is to go back to these old ones, if everything had been recorded, it ought to be in one place.
Yes, but yeah.
Okay.
I mean, it's still digging through the title to find it.
Okay.
Like the one I saw that had 3 amendments, and so got to go through all 3 amendments and find the latest. But yeah, it should be there.
I'm curious on the monitoring of these. There was a brief mention made about Park City in that project, and they had some agency be the monitor. How does that work? What if in 20 years that agency is no longer with us? What now? Is it in Ogden, coming back to Ogden, is it common to have outside parties monitoring anything? I would feel
Yeah.
uncomfortable with that, but.
Yeah, I've never heard of an outside party monitoring. It's typically city planning or engineering if it's a public improvement project, or redevelopment staff if it's a redevelopment project. I know we were just asked, redevelopment called me up last week and said, hey, we approved this agreement and we want to find out what's gone on and has it developed and the way they said. I said, no, they abandoned that project 10 years ago. It was still on the books. So yeah, monitoring is a challenge, and for communities that have hundreds and hundreds of them, it's a challenge.
Thank you.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but maybe Steve knows the answer to this, but I think what he was referring to is the deed restriction piece of that. And so the housing authority up in Park City is monitoring the compliance of the deed restriction of the affordable housing piece of that. So I think that's what that.
Yeah, in the case of Park City, and I think even in Summit County, they like to use the housing authority to monitor that. But that's a good point earlier, which was, what happens if that entity goes, defunct, or however that works. Yeah, that's an important thing to think about when drafting a development agreement, is who's going to take responsibility if something goes sideways. And I think most of them don't anticipate that. They just expect the third party to always be there. I don't know that I've ever seen one where it's gotten to that point, but yeah, definitely something to consider.
Not another reason to be biased against them, actually, right?
Sure.
Is there any, I don't know what the word is there any ability for that developer to come back if I don't know, to not maybe negotiate, but is there any ombudsman or anything if things fall apart, or I guess I'm thinking the referendum or kind of but that's not what I'm looking for, I guess. Is there a legal piece that a developer could always come back and?
It would all be based on contract law then. And so whatever the terms of the contract say, that's, that's what goes.
So yes, and they can be amended and you have to go back through the process, and it's not unusual for them to come back and amend it because something changed or and want to renegotiate the deal sometimes.
And I think Barton mentioned it earlier that a lot of times you're dealing with one developer, and then it's they split it up into 6 phases, and that one developer develops 2 phases, and then they sell it. And now the new developer, many times they don't go back and look through the entire. They don't do their due diligence enough to find out that there is a development agreement, and they come in and they say, okay, we want to change this, this, and this. And then it's a city that tells them, no, you've got development guidelines. Look at this development agreement, and it causes problems. And and if the more that it's sold, the more that it transfers hands, the more problems it can cause. And then trying to amend it, if the city wants to amend it, because we contracted for a certain development, so that's a development that should be created.
Did we all go through an amended development agreement as 2 groups recently with the Warren's property on 12th Street and the townhomes that were being developed immediately to the south?
That was just a zone change, so it wasn't involved in a development agreement, but there was standards with the, was that?
The 12th Street overlay, huh?
Yeah, it was just an overlay, so.
It was rezone and a boundary, small subdivision boundary adjustment.
Yeah.
The property line had to move, right?
Yeah, the parking lot was on the other property. So
Another-
and then adjust the boundaries.
Fortunately, it's the same.
And
part.
the fencing off of the dumpster.
The dumpster, yeah.
Okay, so that was not a development agreement amendment, that was a property line adjustment,
Yes,
okay, in a rezone.
yes.
Now, didn't we just do one of these at Second and Wall where we allowed the 2 houses with the garages in the back?
Yes.
Now, is that a good example of a development agreement, or we just did that last month?
Yeah, I think it was a good example. I think it also points out that we probably need maybe a little bit different zone.
Yes,
I mean, if we had that tool in the tool case, we would have applied it, so.
Because if you're going, these development agreements seem to be, well, we're okay with this here, but we don't want everything that an R3 allows here.
Yes,
But yet we don't have anything in between there.
yeah.
So if it's a poorly written code, it's almost like you're wanting to expand the code so that we can,
Well,
gives you more,
yeah.
I don't know, more
I mean,
bricks.
the value of that development agreement was it pretty well stopped the public clamor against it because the zoning would have allowed different things that they were adamantly opposed to, but what the development agreement allowed, when they understood what it was acceptable.
Yeah, yeah. So like, my recommendation was use it sparingly, doesn't mean don't use them at all. There are times when they're appropriate.
All right, any other discussion on this? I see on the agenda, we have items of joint interest. Is there anything, Glenn, that we have there? Obviously, not NFL football.
So I,
Something different. Go ahead.
So I do have a comment. So I work for Wasatch Front Regional Council, and we are about ready to embark on our Wasatch Choice Vision workshops. I think the one sometime in October, like October 23rd. If you get a chance to attend one of those, it would be really awesome. I know Barton, you're involved with that. I know Dave has been in has been involved in some of those, but they're really we're really trying to get a lot of feedback, and so it'll come to I think it'll come to you guys.
Yeah, Wednesday, the 30th at 6 p.m.
There you go. There, Wednesday the 30th.
Location still to be determined?
I think it is Roy. Yeah.
Thanks, Brandon. Uh-huh.
Yeah, they usually send out a invite or whatever, calendar invite, but we'd love for you guys to be there. Okay, other hat. Thanks.
Awesome. Well, I think with that, appreciate everyone being here. Thanks for all you do, and we will be adjourned.
Yay.
Oh.
In an hour.
I know.
Yes, we did it.
See ya.
Yeah.